Hey, I'm Nicole Ferraro, a contributing editor at Light Reading. Welcome to What's the Story, a short podcast where we take a step back from the most significant topics in telecom to tell you the latest news, how we got here, what it all means, and what to expect next. This week on the show, we're talking with Light Reading's editor-in-chief, Phil Harvey, about Huawei. Light Reading has been extensively covering the ongoing drama surrounding Huawei and how US and UK imposed bans and sanctions are casting a shadow over the company's future and causing some general upheaval for the industry at large. Phil is here to tell us more about what this all means, why it matters, and what's likely to happen next. Phil, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Nicole.
So, what's the story with Huawei right now? Can you give us a general overview of the latest news on where Huawei is facing bans and why, and anything else you might want to share about what's going on?
Yeah, it's a lot to keep up with, but just to give you some insight into a bit of my misery, I'll play a quick game with you.
Okay,
Uh,
great.
I'm g- I'm going to read some excerpts from a light reading story, and I want you to guess the date.
Okay.
So
Okay.
here's the excerpt. The U.S. House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence has decided that Chinese telecom equipment vendors Huawei and ZTE pose a security risk, and U.S. companies should not engage in business with them. The committee's main concern, it would seem, is that it's not possible for Huawei and ZTE to operate without influence from the Chinese government, a claim that both vendors have always rejected. When do you think that story was written?
Well, based on recent history, I would say maybe May 2020.
That's a very good guess because that's almost identically what the reasoning behind the most recent Huawei objections have been from different, government agencies in the U.S. and abroad. The story's dateline was October the 8th, 2012.
Oh my God.
Um, we've been reporting on the banning, rebanning, and near banning of Huawei for 2,842 days and counting.
Wow.
And I think that I just wanted to put that out there is like this has been ongoing, really as long as Huawei's been in the US and in the UK markets in general. This has been a long time. In the UK, Huawei has been banned now from the country's 5G telecom networks. And what that ban means is that the telecom operators can continue to buy Huawei gear through the end of this year if they wanted to stockpile it, for
Mhm.
whatever reason. But they have until 2027, and it has to be completely removed from their 5G networks. So 2027 is really the the marker where where the UK government is saying, okay, all your 5G networks have to be Huawei free by this time. But if you wanted to run them on Huawei gear until then, you could, load up now and do
Mm.
that, which would be kind of costly and inefficient and all that sort of thing. But it just goes to show you that even a ban, takes a long time to kind of roll out and enforce, even in the UK. In France, the cybersecurity agency there for the government told the network operators, that due to their security protocols, they needed to avoid switching over their networks to Huawei as they're considering, picking their vendors for 5G. The Italian government has issued security protocols and new guidelines for its 5G networks. Those don't name Huawei, but they kind of lead to the exclusion of Huawei and other Chinese vendors by the way they are worded. And in the US, we never had like an official nationwide ban. What happened was first the federal networks and the government related purchasing stopped. The FCC prevented US telecom companies from taking money from the Universal Service Fund and using that cash to buy equipment from Chinese vendors. Um, and that's been going on a while, but it kind of heightened, um, in the past, I would say 6 months or so. So kind of in the U.S. and in the U.K., the bans have been talked about and kind of in various stages of happening for years, literally. But it's kind of come to a head in the last 6 months to a year. And in all the cases, I just want to kind of point out that in all of these cases, like the earlier story from 2012 on light reading said, the overarching fear isn't technical. It's the worry that the Chinese state is somehow going to use its state-supported companies to do its bidding and give its government some kind of advantage on the world scene. Um, there used to be That used to sound far-fetched, but the way that China's recently stepped up its persecution of minorities and the way it's trying to, destroy Hong Kong's autonomy, it does weigh heavily, I think, on any government that looks at the connection between Chinese companies and the Chinese political leaders and decides whether to ban it or ignore it. Either way, it's a tough decision to make.
Okay, gotcha. So, with all of these long talked about bans finally coming to a head, what would you say are the broader implications of all of this for Huawei, for the industry at large, and for what's going on internationally with 5G?
Yeah, it's a great question because where this all kind of comes together is the 5G network. I mean, the weird thing is that Huawei's been doing enterprise business around the world. It's been doing telecom business in the U.S. for a while, especially in rural networks. But and of course, it's in the UK networks in various places. But where this matters, I guess, is that in the US and the UK, they're incredibly influential in regards to their technology choices. And when those countries tend to buy off on some technology at some scale, it generally lowers the price. And that makes it easier for other countries to follow in line, especially the smaller European countries. Um, in keeping a massive company like Huawei, which itself already serves the largest population on Earth,
Right.
if you keep that company out of your 5G competitive considerations, it means that stuff's going to cost more. So, on the telecom market, especially in 5G, you only have a handful of companies to begin with that are even commercially capable of producing this stuff at any
Hmm.
scale that's needed to compete, in that large a theater. So when you take Huawei out of the equation, you take ZTE out of the equation, you're down to a pretty small group of operators. And pricing is always a factor in telecom, but it's a massive factor now because people really aren't paying more for 5G.
Hmm.
Um, it's not a massive upgrade on the consumer side. On the operator side, it's just this kind of very long on ramp to some other business plan that's down the road, but it doesn't really have that immediate boost to their earnings that maybe they thought it would, some years ago. So, because of that consideration, the real control that operators can have is to lower their operating cost and lower their capital expenditures as ever. The best way to do that is to get the equipment that's going to cost them the most upfront and then cost them the least amount of money to run over time. And up until very recently, with people considering more kind of open source and multi-sourced solutions, one way to accomplish that end goal was to simply buy the entire kit from the cheapest vendor, and Huawei was often that vendor.
Mm. Okay. So, with all of that in mind, then, what should we be keeping our eye on as far as Huawei is concerned in the coming weeks and months? And do you have any predictions on anything in particular you'll be looking out for?
Yeah, well, it's I think one thing to keep in mind or keep your eye on is Open RAN and the development of
Mhm.
Open RAN because it's been touted as sort of a U.S. friendly way to enable startups to build 5G networks and kind of lock Huawei out. But like we've been writing about, especially Ian Morris has written about this quite a bit. China's influence in the wireless industry, its technology, patents, standards, and so on, it's grown steadily over the last like three wireless generations 3G, 4G, and now 5G. And even in Open RAN, some of the technology and intelligence that set up the techniques that are used in Open RAN actually originated at China Mobile. So
Mhm.
it's going to be really tough for us to walk back the globalization of technology that we've been building for the last 30 or 40 years. So my prediction, I guess I'm kind of going to give you a non-answer here. This is shocking for a journalist, right? But what I'm really watching is if you look at like the big technology trends, AI, automation in manufacturing, and just automation in general, and then 5G, they all sort of seem to march us toward more globalization because the more you can use those technologies across borders in countries, the more powerful they become, the more effective they are. But the politics in almost, especially in, China versus the rest of the world seem to be running the other way.
Mm.
So that's where I'm kind of at a crossroads. I don't really know which way this is going to go, except to say if I could predict how we're going to do with globalization, and are we going to be able to have a more efficient flow of goods, people, capital, money, energy, across borders? If Are we going to get back to that point, or is it going to go the other way and we're going to have this kind of balkanization of new technologies, and then the countries um, with either the most developed technology or the biggest populations end up winning? I think predicting that is kind of key to predicting what's going to happen next. And I don't really have my elbow on the pulse of that just yet. And also the other kind of X factor here is the coronavirus and how different companies and different economies are going to bounce back or find additional difficulty in their recovery.
Yeah.
I'm based in Texas, and we're only at the very beginning of a very long, bad Western.
Yeah.
Where we don't really, it's not going to end in a shootout with the virus. It's just going to be
They might try though.
Yeah, they might. They're definitely armed for it. But yeah, there's just going to be this really long, protracted economic pain that kind of goes with people's ability to, I guess, mentally avoid the virus or thoughts of the virus, as opposed to just dealing with it and taking the measures necessary. So, yeah, if it takes the U.S. longer to recover, that's going to add, more uncertainty toward not just the politics of 5G, but also the development and the development and the distribution of those technologies worldwide as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, on that happy note, Phil, I want to say thank you so much for joining me today. And I have a feeling we'll be returning to talk about Huawei more and probably
Oh,
the coronavirus more.
probably both. Yeah, they definitely all these happy things I've been espousing today.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Phil Harvey, for taking the time to talk with me today on all things Huawei. Thank you also to our producer, Tian Fu, for making this episode, and thank you all for listening. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review, share this episode with a colleague or friend, and subscribe to the Light Reading Podcast for more interviews and insights from the team. That's the story for now. We'll be back next week.